Hey everybody, I'm Chef Tom with allthingsbbq.com, and this is Apple Streusel Pie. But today we're making dessert, apple pie, good old apple pie. And to be specific, we're doing an apple custard pie with a streusel topping. You know, the little crumbly, little crunchy, little sweet, yummy on top of the pie stuff. That's what we're doing. We got some work to do, so let's jump right into it by making our pie dough. All right, so we're gonna put together our pie dough in the stand mixer here in the KitchenAid. We're gonna start with 7 ounces of all-purpose flour and then 7 ounces of cake flour. Now we're just doing this to make the dough a little bit more tender. If all you have is all-purpose, you can go that way. We're also gonna need a little bit of sugar, 2 1/4 ounces. I like to weigh these out to make sure they're accurate. If you don't have a kitchen scale, it's a great thing to have on hand. Pick one up, they're not that expensive. If all you're working with is measuring cups though, I'll have those measurements approximately in the recipe that you can get a link to in the description. So we've got flour, we've got sugar, we need a little bit of salt. We're using the Jacobsen's kosher sea salt. We're gonna do 3/4 of a teaspoon. It's light enough that that's hard to weigh out. And then we're gonna come in with our butter. We've got 9 ounces of butter, which is 2 1/4 sticks. And this is unsalted. It's been in the freezer for a while, so it's nice and hard, and that's what we want. All right, so paddle attachment here. I'm gonna go on first speed to start, and then we'll pop it up to second speed. But what we're looking to do here is we wanna break these chunks of butter down into about pea-sized chunks of butter. And this is probably gonna take 5 minutes or so. All right, so we're just over 5 minutes in here. You can see we've got a couple larger chunks, but for the most part, these are kind of down to that pea size that we want. So we're gonna keep this running now and start to add our eggs. I'm just gonna go one at a time. We'll let that one get fully incorporated before we add the next. So those eggs are now hydrating the flour. We're probably gonna need a little bit more moisture, so we've got some ice water here. We're trying to keep everything cold because we want those tiny chunks of butter to stay intact like that. That's gonna create little pockets of steam when we bake this off. So I'm just gonna drizzle in just a little bit of cold water, maybe a tablespoon or so at a time, and watch as the flour hydrates and soaks up that water. That's probably all we're gonna need. Just a couple tablespoons. Yeah, so we're looking for this crumbly mixture like what's going on right now. We'll let it clump up just a little bit more before we turn it out. All right, that's it. All right, so obviously this doesn't look like pie dough yet, but we're gonna press it together here on the table. And I don't want to overwork this, but I am just looking for it to all come together into one solid piece. And then from there, I'm just going to form it into a disc that we can roll out for our pie crust later after we give it a little rest. Now while we're resting the dough, we're gonna put together our streusel topping, because that's another thing that can kind of just hang out in the fridge while we put the filling together. So we're gonna make this little crumble here, this little streusel topping. We're gonna start with a 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour. And we're gonna do all of our dries here at the beginning. We'll also do a 1/4 cup of sugar. We're gonna add a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of ginger, and then we wanna get some more texture and smoke in there, so I'm gonna add this Noble smoked turbinado. This is a maple smoked turbinado. A nice little extra crunch and just a hint of the smokiness. 2 tablespoons of that. And then we've got our butter. 1 stick unsalted butter, cubed up and cold. It doesn't have to be frozen, just cold. And I almost forgot, you want just a touch of saltiness in there, so we're coming in with that kosher salt again, 1/2 teaspoon. And I'm just gonna give this kind of a pulse, and we'll let it run a little bit. I'm gonna break this down until it's all crumbled up. It should really just have the appearance of like coarse sand. But when you actually squeeze that together, like it will hold together just a touch. That's what we're gonna crumble on top of our pie. So now we're gonna move on to the filling, starting with the custard. All right, so we need 1 egg here to give this just a little beating. We're gonna add to that 1 cup of heavy cream. That's kind of our custard base. Also gonna add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then we're gonna come in with our dry mixture. So we're starting with a cup of sugar. We're gonna add a 1/4 cup of flour just to help thicken things up. And then our seasonings, we've got some cinnamon, clove, and cardamom. This is probably easier to do with a fork, but here I am without a fork. All right, so we're gonna add that mixture and just whisk it all together. So this is kind of our thickening agent, our custard. It's going to surround all of our apples. Just give it a whisk, kind of incorporate everything, and then we can set this aside and break down those apples. So we're using 2 different apples today. We've got the Granny Smith for a nice tart, firm apple, and these are a little bit sweeter apple. This is a Crips Pink apple. We want to get all of these peeled up, and I have peeled a lot of apples in my life, especially as a pastry chef, and I can tell you that the easiest way to do this is to cut the top and the bottom off, and then just peel the sides and do everything all at once. So if you're cutting the tops off, don't cut it off and then peel it. You save yourself some time by doing all of the same task all at once. So then you can simply come top to bottom, working pretty fast to get that peel off of there. All right, so now we can just kind of take the sides off here, and we're gonna slice them from there. And again, we'll work through all of our apples before we start slicing. All right, so we're gonna do slices today about a 1/2 inch thick, because I want these to have some texture to them when they're done cooking. We don't want them just mushy. All right, for now, I'm just gonna pour some water over these so they don't brown before we get them into the pie. Do a little lemon juice. And then we'll just set these aside. Well, we're ready to roll out our pie dough, but before we do that, we're gonna butter up the pie pan. We just want a thin layer of butter on here. 1, to prevent sticking, and also because, probably mostly because of the texture that it creates on the pie. Almost like a little bit of a fried crust to it. Doesn't take much, just probably about a tablespoon will get the whole pan. All right, now the pie dough's rested, it's chilled down, should be pretty firm. Get a little flour down on our work surface here. And throw some on top as well. And then we're just gonna use a rolling pin to press this out. Roll it out. All right, so we're gonna work this out now. This is a little bit more dough than what we're gonna need, but you'll really just have some scraps left over around the edges. So we're gonna keep this moving, keep some flour underneath it so we can avoid the sticking. And then we wanna work this out till it's a bit larger diameter than the pie pan itself. All right, that looks pretty good. So we're just gonna come right over the top. We're gonna lift the edges up and push down into the inside corners. We don't want this to shrink up on us, so we're gonna do everything we can here to make sure that it all kind of compacts together. In fact, if you want to, you can even go ahead and let your dough rest for a few minutes before you start this part to make sure that you don't get any of that shrinkage while you're baking it. So I'm pressing down to the corner and into the side. All right, that looks pretty good. And we're just gonna leave a little overlap here, trim off the outside. You're not coming right to the edge of the lip, leaving a little bit more than that. So now with that excess, we can kind of roll this back over the top, and then we're just gonna pinch it into place once we get it rolled. So just pinching and compressing all the way around the edge of the crust. All right, let's go ahead and bring all the components together now. We've strained off the water from our apples, drained that. We're just gonna load them into our pie shell here. Gonna mound them up. And they're gonna cook down a bit, so it's fine to mound them if it looks like you have a lot. Next, we're gonna come in with the custard. Just gonna pour this over the top, kind of evenly distribute it. Let it settle in. And it should come about 3/4 of the way up the side of the pie. And I know sometimes people like to wait to put the streusel on until this is set a little bit more, but because most of that custard is down below, we can go ahead and load up the streusel now. It's not gonna cause any problems. I like to kind of squeeze this and then crumble it over so you get some larger chunks as well. We'll just kind of gently move this around to the edges, trying not to lose too much of it. Oh, that looks good. All right, we're ready to go to the grill. Well, today we're baking our pie on the Yoder Smoker's YS640S pellet grill. We're running at 375 degrees indirect setup. We're using apple pellets because we're making apple pie. So whole tree from roots to fruits. Let's get in there. I'm gonna slide it right here on top and close her up. Pie's been on for an hour now. It's not done yet, but I wanna give you guys a little peek just to see the progress. So we're starting to get some browning around the edges, but it's not really there. If we give this a wiggle, you can see that it's really not set. Check out right here. See how liquid that is? This custard probably needs to come up to about 160 degrees before it's fully cooked. It should still have some jiggle when it's done, but it needs to set up a little bit more. Well guys, the pie has been on for 2 hours now, and it's come up to temperature in the center. We're at about 155 on that custard. It's gonna carry over cook just a little bit. It's gonna set up from there. We've got some nice browning on top. I'll give you guys a little peek, and then we're gonna cool it off. So nice little crust on the top from the crumble. In the center here, ooh, look at that. 156, 157. So that's great. Let's see if we give this just a little jiggle. So we've still got some movement in the center, which is nice. That means it's not gonna be dried out, but we're ready to pull this thing off. Well, we've given the pie an hour to rest. It really could cool off a little bit more, but we're not waiting any longer. It's just still a bit soft. It's really best to let this cool all the way down, but man, we want to get in there. Boom. That's a beauty. I'm going to top it off with just a little bit of homemade whipped cream. It's good to go. All right, here's something that's totally unnecessary, but you guys want to see something cool. Kids, don't try this at home. How do we do this? Woo! That's too much. But it's fun. All right, let's get a bite. I want some of that bottom crust. I want some of that whipped cream. Oh man. These apples have fantastic texture. I mean, the flavor is great. Classic apple pie flavors, but it's so much extra creamy because of that custard instead of just doing a straight up apple filling. And then this crust on top, this is from the edge. It's got some of that streusel on it. It's tender, but it's got a nice crunch around the edge. That's a classic right there. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out allthingsbbq.com for all the products featured in today's video. If you enjoyed the recipe, hit that subscribe button. And if you have any questions or comments, or there's anything you'd like to see me cook, let me know in the comment section down below. and let's be good to one another. For more recipes, tips, and techniques, head over to attbbq.com/thesauce. All Things Barbecue, where barbecue legends are made.